Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So this is a podcast really that was triggered by Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, who when he was out visiting bushfires attempted to shake hands with some of the people and they absolutely didn't want to shake his hand. They refused to. Now, not only did Mr. Morrison look really uncomfortable, which is understandable, the way he handled it at one point was to actually take a lady's hand, put it into his own, shake it, and almost pose for photographs. It was almost as if he didn't realise that we're in a different age where, of course, people were taking photos and they were videoing it live, and he really looked as if he'd forced a situation and just wasn't aware of the impact, not just of social media, but the fact that he couldn't control the narrative. So that was the trigger for the podcast. We've called it Social Awareness and Leadership. And today I'm talking with Stu Trevena, who's one of the team. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Leadership Bites with your host Guy Bloom, a leadership podcast, conversations, just me talking and occasional interviews. Check us out at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and tell everyone. So we have got the topic, which is, does the growth of social media put greater emphasis on leaders to be self-aware? And I guess that kicked off when, I can't remember who it was now, but one of us saw the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, attempting to shake hands with people when he went out to the bushfire, and he got the comment, "I don't really want to," from one guy who was a firefighter, and then he had the lady whose hand he physically took and put in his own and kind of forced her to shake hands, almost as if he was doing it for like a photo opportunity, as opposed to being cognizant of the fact that people were recording it and it was out on social media minutes later with commentary that went with it. And I kind of guess that fired up the question then.
Yeah, I think it was a moment in time where you saw somebody in an environment that wasn't quite going to plan, and I think without kind of social media being as popular as it is, in days gone by, would that have just been a moment that would have passed? Whereas now, you know, that's gone out there and he's kind of being judged for it, and there's a story of him that goes ahead of him. And even, you know, just before we started this, I had a quick look on YouTube and just looked for Scott Morrison. Yeah. And 6 videos of the first page are all related to that one moment, that one incident. You know, we're talking like 500,000 views, 750,000 views. And has that little moment defined him now? And now is he in a position to recover from that? Is, you know, the whole handling of the situation?
I see that, the impact that it's had on him, and whether or not that impact that it might have on his story and his brand. I'm slightly more focused on the actual lack of awareness around his own ability to handle the situation, and I wonder if it's because he himself isn't capable of doing it and that was captured on media, or his recognition that it was going wrong in front of a media platform really made him kind of super aware of how wrong it was going, which then led to him, and I'm just watching that YouTube clip of when he met the firefighter who literally just did not want to look at him, talk to him, shake his hand. So all the normal social protocols of, hey, it's the Prime Minister of the country, were just gone. And all he could do was walk away. You know, he literally put his hands in his pockets and he walked away. So I wonder if it's that without comfort and a real savvy around social media, I just wonder if it just highlights the individual's either personal discomfort with social media, or I wonder if the cameras weren't there, would he have been a completely different character? But he's just so wound up by the fact that the cameras are there, he goes, the best thing I could do is get out of here.
Let me grab you and move. This isn't working. But it is. I think that's almost more uncomfortable, is seeing him then just lurk in the background, kind of not really sure what to do or where to go.
Yeah, and I think that's what I found fascinating, because he's got advisors, and again, maybe that's what this does. It catches people for what they really are, because if you were socially media aware, you go, this can't work out well for me if I just walk off. Normally, in a organisational context, it would just be an awkward meeting that there might be one or two observers to, and it would be kind of played back as, yeah, that didn't go very well. But it would be relatively self-contained with a little bit of conversation, a little bit of story afterwards that might make its way around the place. But the repercussions here are so enormous. So, yeah, I think that's the bit that fascinates me. Is it him? He's not capable of dealing with emotional intelligence, with the reality of what's going on for another human being, and that's captured on film? Or does that reality of him being in that context make it worse for him? When I look at, I think, a lot of leaders, I'm noticing with one of the clients I've got right now, none of them are on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you know, we've spoken about it, and it's an odd platform because it's so. I find the people I talk to, it's so open to interpretation of what it is there to do.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you've even seen. There's almost like the LinkedIn police. This is the place for this. It's not the place for that. It's a really weird kind of place where people are interacting. But I think I've shared this. I had a room full of people and said, "Who's on LinkedIn?"
Yeah,
and pretty much 100% of the room said yes. And then the second question, who uses LinkedIn? And it dropped to about 60%. And then it was, well, what do you use it for? And there was, well, it's like an online CV. It's good for resourcing.
Yes.
Through to, actually, no, it's good for raising my brand profile. It's good for learning about what's happening in my industry. So I think although we've got access to it, utilising it within that leadership space is very different depending who you speak to at the moment. And I don't know if this is how you should do it. Do you know what I mean? Or it's right for one group to say this is the right way to do it.
I mean, LinkedIn is a classic example because, you know, we work in organisations. So this whole reality around LinkedIn is indicative of what people see as a marketing tool and what people see as an inverted commas social media platform. And you've got some people that are very, very comfortable with technology, but they haven't wrapped their heads around maybe their relationship with, I'm just going to say, media on a daily basis. And it's almost like their relationship, like some people's relationship with leadership. Oh, it's a thing I've got to do in that moment with that group on Tuesday. So some people's relationships with leadership, being a leader, or the cultural narrative or social media, it's almost when it crops up, I'll do something with it. And then there are people that see it's the essence of what I'm about. You're managing and you're leading, and we're affecting the culture all the time. I need to be media alert. That's real in the world. So some people seem to embed it into their thinking, and then others seem to approach it as and when it crops up. I think.
Yeah, that's true. And I've just, as you've said that, I've just thought. So with the Scott Morrison, we've almost said there's what we've seen is the reality of him, and I think, you know, he's been caught doing something, right? And that's what's being shared. Whereas, is there, with a lot of social media, it's almost working the other way, that it's not the reality of us, it's a projected view, a desired, you know, it's our best bits that are kind of published online, and maybe we kind of know that. And I think what it's done in that instance, maybe what it's done is, as those that are looking at leaders, it's actually giving us a glimpse of who we really have in front of us, and that's why it's spread so much, and maybe why the importance of that online presence is greater than it has been before. Because I think if we look at levels of trust in leaders, that kind of, you know, there's like the Edelman Trust Barometer, which shows that trust is a depleting resource that we have, that we want to know who we've got in front of us, and these stories like this, I guess, are a reason as to why those levels of trust are depleting.
They're used to controlling the narrative, and they're used to controlling the narrative in the sense of being in a room with a group of people, and through personal characteristics they can engender their own story with the interactions that they themselves can control. And the thing about social media is, it feels, I think, to a lot of executives that one foot wrong and I can be hung, drawn and quartered. And I think there's something about their relationship with, in this business, because of hierarchy, I will be respected, but outside of this hierarchy, I'm cannon fodder. And because, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, who that person is, 10 years old or 100, it doesn't matter who they are or where they are, they can make a comment. And they may make a comment that says, what a stupid tie, or look at the ears on her. And they're fearful of that word that she used, I didn't like it. And they're going to get feedback that is hard to change the narrative of, because the public or the public space isn't necessarily going to listen to your argument, because people are very black and white sometimes in their perspectives, and entering into conversations on social media is something people fear. So I think what there is a recognition that social media is important, or media is important, that there's a relationship with it that is, I think there's a confusion about the Instagram moments, which is almost like having a photograph taken for the newspaper. You can almost contrive it. And then there's your voice is being recorded, or somebody's videoing you on their phone, or you've created created a corporate film or podcast or whatever it is, but it's open to translation. And I think that's where there's this really weird truth where people are straddling, do I really need to engage with it? Because actually, unless I've got a media-based business, what the heck do I need to be doing on those platforms, really? You know, I'm an FD. If I'm the marketing director, I'm probably all over it. But other people, it's why do I care about it?
And you think some of that comes from a fear of the uncontrollables once stuff is out there? Is that what you're saying?
I know a lot of senior people that are very conscious about their personal brand, but primarily, unless they have a very strong sense of self, it's in the negative. I don't like the sound of my own voice, or I don't like the way I look, or they have a discomfort with almost the naturalness that's required in the media space these days. There is an ease that's required, because I think back in the day you could be, inverted commas, corporate, and you could deliver a corporate tone, but that's reacted quite negatively to. So you've got to be at ease with yourself. You've got to show a version of yourself that people have a sense of trusting. And I think that's for a lot of senior people who, you know, the old gag is, you're not as funny as you think you are, because, you know, people are laughing not because you're funny but because you're senior. They're often in a contrived space where they're not quite sure of in their hearts they know that they may not be being as natural and they're not as easy as they'd like to be, but they have control, so they're okay. But once that gets taken from them, I think that's what they fear. They fear the lack of control, and they don't control the narrative because they're not so comfortable with themselves that they can get a straight message across. That's my sense of it. I don't know what your thoughts are, but it feels like there's a lot of angst around it, I guess.
I think there's going to be elements of that, because the whole topic was about being kind of self-aware.
Yeah.
The self-aware element was, I guess, because once it's out there, right? And I think that's part of it. So I need to be aware of the things I'm saying, doing, projecting, because I'm going to be judged for it. Opinions will be created on me. Does that mean, because of that, I'm therefore going to have to make sure I do the right things because somebody's watching, versus I need to make sure I do the right things because it's the right thing to do? And is that not a positive thing, that maybe because more eyes are looking, leaders are being held more to account? And I think maybe there's a perception that what we see is a real aversion, and maybe that's...
Yes.
Does that kind of make sense?
Well, I think there is something that says, you know, once this goes out, I lose control over it, and what I say today may not be true tomorrow, and the public domain is not yet mature enough to take what I say now as necessarily being where I am now, because it will dig back. You know, you're getting people in Hollywood, for example, where they made a tweet 9 years ago in a context that now is different, and they're being attacked over it, and you go, yeah, because 9 years ago they didn't have the maturity that they do now, or whatever it might be, and they've shifted or changed, but you said it, didn't you? And well, you actually said that, and you go, well, yes, but the context was different. Yeah, but you did say it, and I think that's what I think.
Here's the tweet. We've copied the tweet. Here it is. Here's what you said. And I'm working with an organisation right now. They do work where they dig holes, and I said, so wouldn't it be great if when you're out you take photos of the hole being dug and make some sort of commentary on it, because they're doing that for other partners, and, you know, a great day's work on behalf of client X. The look I got back was, yeah, the problem with that is that when we take that photo and it goes online, you suddenly get a load of comments that says you're not wearing the right gloves, that high-vis jacket's not done up correctly, etc. And it doesn't matter if we think it's right and it's perfect. Somebody else will take umbrage with it and say, yeah, but technically that's not the way to do it. And then we end up having to have a discussion about it, and it's just not worth it. So they'd rather be vanilla and just not do it than have a relationship with it. And I guess that's where it takes a real strength of maturity to say, this is who we are, this is what we're about, or this is who I am and this is what I'm about. And I'm willing to accept challenge from that public space. And that takes a real strength, because there is a safety in, why care about that? Actually, I can just ignore it, because actually I'm not really going to be judged by it. I'm going to be judged by certain data points that I'm doing in my job. So what the heck does, you know, media awareness mean to me? But what it does, though, it loses them a lot of opportunity, because they've got all these clients that they could be sending a continual stream of positive stories to. Look at what we're doing today. Look at what the guys are out doing. And they don't, because they fear that out of the 100 messages that they could send out to the world going how awesome and how brilliant, they could accidentally
accidentally take a picture of a van that has a bit of a low tread on a tyre, and somebody notices it, they make a comment on it, and then the client goes, yeah, but don't be putting out a picture with that fault on it and then tagging us in it. And they go, so do you know what, it's just not worth doing it. So
I've seen, yeah, of course it does. Yeah, that's the one that gets the airtime, right? It's interesting that I think what they're doing is that's the words that's being used, that's the rationale behind it, but maybe that's just a mask for that fear. And I guess it's I'm putting out there, but I guess it's attached to my name then. I'm the one that's standing behind that message. Is it a reflection of me? Does that, do you know what I mean? Is there something that's doing something to my brand value that others will see by doing it?
Yeah.
And people say I just get inundated with recruiters offering me jobs, and that's a bit. I mean, well, you don't. Let's get a bit intelligent with who you're connecting with and what that looks. I think there's LinkedIn. I guess primarily that was its purpose initially. Are you willing to engage with it?
Do you know what it is? Vehicle? It's the craft of it. It's recognising that it is a craft, and it does shift and change. So LinkedIn, as you say, it was a CV, it was an online CV, right? And now you've got people like Gary V. You know Gary V?
Yeah.
Whose name I can never quite remember.
Vaynerchuk or Vaynerchuk, something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It'd be more helpful.
Hugely insulting if we can't.
Vaynerchuk, yeah, Gary Vaynerchuk, and who's this fantastic sort of, he's highly social media competent, and he's all over the place. And he kind of announced that LinkedIn is the new platform for doing business. Forget Facebook, forget Instagram, and all that. I mean, not forget it, and so all of a sudden you get people streaming into this LinkedIn space, and it was slowly morphing because, as you mentioned earlier, some people might say, hey, I know it's not for LinkedIn, but I just want to say, wow, this happened at home. And why are you making that comment on LinkedIn? It's not social media. So LinkedIn, from my perspective, dealing with leaders, is this massive marketing opportunity. It's this massive storytelling space that actually people still aren't sure whether or not they want to utilize it in that way. They don't necessarily feel as if that they want to interact with it as maybe as a sales platform, maybe as a brand platform. I think it's changing so quick, and the power of it is shifting, and the impact of it is growing, that almost a lot of people would just rather stay away from it. And I think that's the question that we pose. Does the growth of social media put greater emphasis on leaders to be self-aware? I think they are self-aware, and they're so self-aware about themselves that they kind of go, do you know what, I'm going to stay off it. I'm going to keep off it because it's too dangerous. It's not dangerous, if you embrace it. It's like anything in life, isn't it? Everything's dangerous if you don't know what you're doing with it. But I think a lot of people are so self-aware. I'm a bit overweight and I don't like pictures of myself on it. I have this kind of funny way of saying these words and I don't like it, and I think it makes me sound daft, and I don't know what it is. I think it makes the people that have got that comfort embrace it, but the people that don't go near it. And I get this sense that actually what that means is that there's a lot of businesses are losing these massive opportunities to connect with people that might want to come and work for them because the stories and the narratives that are coming out of them are attractive, and it would make people want to stay because there's a constant story about what a great organisation this is to work for. And rather than it just coming from a marketing department in a relatively bland, vanilla, look what we're doing on this day, it loses this kind of human approach that the new generation of, inverted commas, youngsters coming through, which is me now being 50 is nearly everybody, is it's almost as if there's these two truths going on. A lot of the people in senior positions just stay away from it, and a lot of the younger people are looking for it. It's almost like the two don't quite meet yet.
It's so much dangerous. I think it requires a certain amount of... I guess it's the ultimate test of being vulnerable, isn't it? You're not just putting yourself out there to those that you know.
Yeah.
I'm really putting myself out there and kind of exposing myself to all manner of... I guess it's not even I'm exposing myself to criticism.
Yeah.
I'm exposing myself to a different level of criticism because there's something very faceless, anonymous about me. The phrase keyboard warrior has come synonymous with the troll world. It's a thing, and I think there's a different psychology that exists. When I sit at my keyboard in my house with my own views, it's safe. I can say what I like, and I think it's not even so much that I'm getting feedback that I would probably never even get in any normal face-to-face environment. I mean, you look at some of the comments that people put online for certain, you can't believe that people would think some of the stuff, let alone kind of say it. And I guess that's the world that you're kind of putting yourself out to, and I think the vast majority would look at it with interest and insight and gain value. But I guess the psychology of us looking at the comments that are written, would you tend to focus on those other ones? And I think you're right. Is it safer for me not to do that? and not to get myself out there.
Yeah.
The work that we do, and we talk about the challenges that leaders face and the ability to get proximity to their people, it is a recurring challenge because of pressure or time. And this, for me, is just another vehicle, another way of doing that. And I've seen some great examples. Do you ever remember seeing the Richard Branson photo when he was walking around the offices and there was a guy asleep on the sofa? Oh, yeah. Did you see this? And he took a selfie and then posted it out there. I thought, that's amazing. So not only is that amazing externally, but internally, I think I took so many positives from that. And I thought, yeah, man, he's got it. That's right. He's got it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do remember that, but I also remember the commentary it was a spectrum of how hilarious, what a great character, seeing the humour in that and posting that out, brilliant, to somebody going, I bet his boss gives him a right roasting when he gets in the next morning, through to, how horrible of you to shame an employee in a public forum. And that's the reality of the reaction, that it's people react to these things. So I put something out on LinkedIn the other day, which was just my face with a quote next to it.
Was this the fear quote?
Yeah. Fear is in your imagination. The thing that you fear can only exist in the future, creating hesitancy to act now because of things that do not or may never exist. Danger is real, fear is a choice.
Yeah.
Now, so I got, as of today, 38 thumbs up and all that stuff and comments, and one person with no malice but just their particular opinion basically fundamentally disagreed with me. and they said, it's a mental health issue. And I responded while going, well, no, I don't think being anxious is a mental health issue. If you have a mental health issue and that makes you anxious, then that's a different thing. But having anxiety is not in itself a mental health issue, unless you say, like, performance management means the good and the bad. So mental health includes all positives and all negatives, therefore it's all mental health. Well, then everything's a mental health issue then, kind of stuff. But what I mean is, it's not that they're right or wrong. We could get into that debate forever. It's the fact that somebody in a public forum doesn't like it and they respond with a disagreement. And Guy Bloom can handle that one-on-one because he's not a corporate entity. But there's somebody in a marketing department that if that had got an MD's face on it with a quote and it had gone out and then there'd have been a negative response, they then have to handle that and go, do we accept that and we're okay with triggering by holding a position? We're triggering a response, or do we go vanilla in a manner that means we're always safe? And I think maybe that's what social media or media is doing. It's forcing people to, if you're going to do it, you've got to stand for something. And a lot of people don't really want to acknowledge what they stand for.
I think the trigger and the response, I think that's a really interesting point. I had a room full of senior leaders and they're trying to encourage a culture where people speak up. That's a big thing they want at the moment. They're in a place of conformity and they kind of want to move to this place.
Yeah.
I asked her, so unanimously, by show of hands, how many, you're all in agreement, you want the people within your organisation to speak up, unanimously, hands all in the air. I said, but do you? Do you really? Because I suspect the things that people aren't speaking up about are the things that might be a little harder to hear. What do you do in the face of that? Because that's what you're asking for. And I think by nature of your response to their hand in the air telling you things will be a factor on how much of this culture is going to succeed or not. We talk a lot about vulnerability and courage. I think there is a requirement to have to do that as a leader now. I don't see how you can't forge new ways, creative, or a lot of the buzzwords around without that element of being vulnerable right now.
Yeah, maybe that's what I guess I noticed with that whole, going back to the trigger for this for us was Scott Morrison. It showed, heaven forbid, and it doesn't have to be like that, but it showed an older guy who was caught with a response that he wasn't used to. And without social media there, nothing would have happened other than maybe a line in a newspaper that would have made the statement. But the physically seeing it layers on this level of emotion. And I think that's what it is. It's this whole idea that, back to your point, I know the situation you're talking about is, back to what you were saying, is social media is kind of a metaphor for having to have the honest conversation.
Yeah.
It's if you're prepared to have the honest conversation in the organisation, the chances are you're going to learn and have the comfort in the way that you would then interact with media. And I don't necessarily call LinkedIn social media. I think social media for me is Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and that kind of stuff, whereas I just see LinkedIn as a marketing conduit, really, more than social media. But I guess maybe it's morphing more that way. But the point being, yeah, maybe that's what it is. We've said about being emotionally intelligent and more sort of socially aware, but maybe that's what it is. It's about the leader's capacity to grow into a point where your emotional intelligence is now not contained in the safety net of an organization where you have positional power, and actually, even if there is a narrative that's going on, you know that you're not going to hear it because nobody's going to say it to your face. And I think in the past you will, and you still do, see people's opinions of their leaders that are held back and maybe only demonstrated at exit interviews or employee satisfaction surveys. But when it comes to media, I'm going to hear it, and I'm going to hear it from people that will judge me independently from a distance. And I may say they don't have the context, but they'll probably have enough context to have an opinion. And a lot of people don't like that, and I think it comes back to that whole, unless they're used to handling those things in real time and have put themselves into a place where they've learned how to get good at it, there's no way they're going to go near the media stuff. What's our conclusion then?
From my perspective, I think it's one of those things that's not going away, and this is my view, is I think there's such a population there, and it's such a mechanism for sharing views, thoughts, influence. I can't see how you can't embrace it.
Yes.
And embrace it doesn't mean I lovingly walk into it, but at least play with it, at least kind of step into that space a little, because actually I think by nature of you not, potentially that outside judgment is happening anyway, that you don't have a version of you that's out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. So if I've heard you correctly, it's not so much that the genie's out of the bottle, but the reality is that this thing is not going away. You've got people coming through from different ages, call them whatever we want to call them, who are absolutely living through a social media or media lens. They are absolutely judging you by a whole platform of what they can find out about you, what they see about you. For me to really trust you, I don't want to just see you in the moments that you present yourself to me in your finest in a town hall event or a public event where it's all scripted and it's manufactured. I actually, if I'm going to trust you, I want to see you in life doing your job around the place, but in a manner that isn't scripted, and it gives me a line of sight on what you're really about, because that's how I see everybody else. I am used to seeing stars and people that are famous, and if you are a leader, you're famous in your own workspace, right? And I'm used to seeing them in a much larger timeline when they are vulnerable, and you mentioned that earlier, and if I don't see that in you, then I do think it's contrived because I have no other examples of it. And I think that's what leaders have to wrap their head around. I think the summary then is you've got to embrace it, you've got to get with it. You can ignore it, and you can probably get away with ignoring it for a while. But the truth of the matter is, if you've got a business that's going to be around and sustainable and here for the long term, then leaders absolutely have to connect with it. Maybe it's not just about being more self-aware, but it's that willingness to embrace that and translate themselves into that space and see it as just as important.
Nice summary.
Okay, well, on that note, I'll bring us to a halt. I'll see you on the next podcast. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Check us out at livingbrave.com, and of course subscribe to hear more of our podcasts. See you soon.